5.3, two-way tables and probability. So first of all, review of a two-way table. A two-way table displays data collected that fit into multiple categories. So for example, over here, we have juniors and seniors who are either attending or not attending a dance or some sort of school function. So they would fit into two categories. I could either be a junior, and then I would also fit into a category of attending or not attending. Or I could be a senior, and then I would either be attending or not attending. So the two different categories are class versus attendance. Now, joint frequency is each entry in the table. So when we talk about joint frequency, I'm talking about the 42, the 64, the 77, or the 37. Those are my joint frequencies. It's each individual entry. Marginal frequencies are the sums of the rows and the columns. So our marginal frequencies are going to be the 119, the 101, the 106, the 114, and the 120, or I'm sorry, the 220, is when you then take those numbers and add them up to get your totals. So if we're looking at this table, there are a total of 106 juniors in this survey. There's a total of 101 students who are not attending whatever this function is. And then down here, we have 220 total students in this survey, whether they're juniors, seniors, attending, not attending, 220 total. Now, joint relative frequency are the ratios of a frequency that is not in the total row or the total column to the total number of values or observations. So, for example, if we're talking about joint, I'm going to take one of my joint frequencies, let's say 42, and I'm going to compare it to the absolute total, which is 220 in the table. That would just be one example. And by finding that number or that probability, it would tell me, okay, 42 of the people in this survey are juniors who would be attending this function. Now, marginal relative frequency is the sum of the joint relative frequencies in a row or column. So let's say I took my 42 out of 220 and I added it. Let's stick with the juniors because then I have 42 juniors who are attending. I have 64 who are not attending, and I added those together. Well, that would get me a total of how many juniors are total in this survey, and it would give me that probability. Then we have conditional relative frequency, which is the ratio of a joint relative frequency to the marginal relative frequency, and you can find a conditional relative frequency using a row total or a column total of a two-way table. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more as we move forward. Example 1, finding joint and marginal relative frequencies. You randomly survey students about whether they are in favor of planting a community garden at a school. Of 96 boys surveyed, 61 are in favor. Of 88 girls surveyed, 17 are against. Part A, organize the results in a two-way table, then find and interpret the marginal frequencies. So, first of all, I'm going to make my two-way table. And I'm going to start over here. And I know I'm working with girls. And I know I'm working with boys. And then I'm going to have my total. Now, the boys and girls can either be in favor or against planting a community garden. So I'm going to write favor. And I'm going to write against. And then once again, I'm going to have our totals. Now, if I go look at my data and I'm talking about the girls, it told me that of 88 girls surveyed, so I know that my total girls are 88, 17 are against, and then it also told me that of 96 boys, so I know my total is 96, 61 are in favor of this community garden. That's pretty much all they gave me. Now we have to figure out the rest. So in order to find out my girls who are in favor, I'm going to take my total girls, which is 88, and subtract 17, which tells me 71 are in favor. Of my boys, 96, I'm going to subtract 61, which is going to tell me 35 are in favor. And then I'm going to finish up my totals here. So I'm going to add 71 and 61, 132. 17 plus 35 is going to give me 52. And then total of both of those, we're going to have 184 total girls and boys were surveyed. Now, interpret your marginal frequencies. Your marginal frequencies are these guys right here. So we can talk about them, but I'm not going to write something for all of them. So interpreting this, there are a total of 88 girls surveyed. We could keep going. There's a total of 96 boys surveyed. There's a total of 132 students. For the community garden. There's a total of 52 against the community garden, and then there's 184 total students in the survey. Part B, make a two-way table that shows the joint and marginal relative frequencies. So we're going to make roughly the same table. I'm going to try to make it larger though, because we're going to have a lot to fit in here. So we're still going to have our girls. We're still going to have our boys. And we're still going to have our total. And then we're still going to have those in favor of the garden. And we're still going to have those against the garden. And then we're still going to have our total. Now, if we're showing joint and marginal relative frequencies, this is where we start using some of our probabilities. So girls who are in favor, there are 71, but that is 71 out of 184 total, which if we write this roughly as a decimal, I'm going to use 4 decimal places here, 0.3859. Girls against, well, there's 17 out of 184, 0.0924. And then we could do the same thing with our totals. So our total, we had 88 out of 184, which is roughly 0.4783. Now to complete our table, we're just going to keep doing this. So now we're going to look at the boys in favor, which was 61 out of our total. And again, we're going to convert this into a decimal. The reason we're doing decimals here is because ultimately we're going to look at these as a percent when we interpret them. And then we have our total over here, which is 96 out of 184. And then last one with our totals down here, 132. $52. And then ultimately, we're going to have a total of 1 because we have 184 out of 184. Now, the reason we would make a table like this, which when we're typically coming up with questions, when we're answering things, you don't make the entire table. You just base everything off your table from A and find the one you want. So let's say we're looking at this joint relative frequency. Well, what this joint relative frequency is telling us is that we had 17 girls who were against the community garden. So this is roughly about 9% of girls surveyed, or sorry, that's wrong. About 9%, and it's not of girls. So about 9% of students, the total students surveyed, are girls who are against the garden. That would be one interpretation of that specific spot. Now, let's go over here and look at this one. This one would be, okay, well, about 33% of all of the students surveyed are boys who are in favor of the garden. And then let's interpret one last one. Let's say we interpret this one down here, because this is not a joint relative frequency. This is now a marginal relative frequency. And this would tell us about 72% of students surveyed are in favor of the garden. Because now we're talking about the entire column, which is the favor column. So it's not both boys and in favor, it's just the total column of favor, and it's both boys and girls.